Well, when I put my fingers to my temples and like become one with my blue check, what it tells me is that the American media like has a really, really substantial blind spot when it comes to Palestine. A lot of it is rooted in, I think, just like pretty basic, like anti-Muslim, anti-Arab bigotry. And like that's a sort of like kind of base explanation that you can give for a lot of why like like footage of, it explains why MSNBC will show footage from the aftermath of a stabbing attack in Tel Aviv, but will not show the footage of, like a far more routine occurrence, which is an IDF soldier shooting a Palestinian dead. And I think that like that explains some of it. And then the other part of it, though, is that, and I think that this is perhaps like a more, and then another explanation is that, there are probably some journalists who bought the Israel lobby's line and said like, like they were like, when they asked questions about it, they were like, listen, don't worry about it. And they took their word for it. But what I think is probably the most likely and the biggest explanation for this particular story, or at least one that has an outsized impact, is that so much of what is revealed in this documentary is like fairly oxygenated to media and Washington types. A lot of them would look at a lot of the conversations in this, and they would look at a lot of the kinds of people that are talking, and they would see the things that they say, and they would say, that's really interesting. I kind of already knew that, though. And they don't take that as an indictment of the system in which they work. They take that as evidence of how banal the facts are in this movie. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Because the thing is that there is no recorded testimony of these kinds of things, even if it's such a, widely felt sentiment. There isn't the kind of frankness, even if like, this reporter or somebody imagines there to be. I think that there is something like, really important to be said for the fact that like this documentary does a lot to just put people in front of a camera in an environment in which they never get to speak before cameras. And so a kind of conversation that only ever really happens behind closed doors, or at least in some very private rooms, it comes out into the open. And because a lot of the people who report on these spaces, and that's not to say that like they're evil reporters or sinister people, but just because like they're so embedded in these systems that they may not recognize it. And I think that that's like a really sad kind of tragic thing that like a lot of media class types have to live with, especially when it comes to Israel-Palestine, is that the horror and the misdeeds and like the epic failure and incompetence and the scheming, all of it, it resides in plain view. They just don't do anything about it.
Jeffrey Epstein.